Welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to explore the fascinating story of Jacob, the man who fought with God. Jacob's life is one of the deepest narratives in the Bible, filled with deceit, spiritual struggles, and redemption. Jacob wasn't perfect, but God chose him for great things, transforming him into Israel, the patriarch of the nation that bears his name. This is a story about struggle, faith, and transformation that can bring valuable lessons to our lives today. In this video, we will unravel Jacob's journey, from his family rivalries to his battle with God and reconciliation with his brother Esau. Stay with us until the end to understand what this spiritual journey teaches us about our own walk of faith. Now, let's begin this incredible biblical saga. Jacob's story begins even before his birth, when God told Rebekah, his mother, that her two sons would be the origins of two nations and that the older would serve the younger. Genesis 25 verse 23. This already foreshadowed that Jacob's life would be marked by conflict and struggle. He was born grasping the heel of his twin brother Esau, a symbolic action that prefigured the constant rivalry between the two throughout their lives. From a young age, Jacob and Esau followed different paths. Esau was a hunter and his father Isaac's favorite, while Jacob, who stayed among the tents, was favored by his mother, Rebekah. This division within the family only fueled the tensions between the two brothers. Jacob grew up with a cunning and calculating temperament, which would later help him obtain Esau's birthright in a very controversial way. Even so, God had a greater plan for Jacob. Despite his flaws, he was chosen to be the father of a great nation. In Genesis 28 verses 13 to 15, God reaffirmed the covenant made with Abraham and Isaac, promising that Jacob's descendants would be as numerous as the dust of the earth, and that all the families of the earth would be blessed through him. This shows that even in the face of our failures, God can use us to fulfill his purposes. Jacob's saga is a true journey of spiritual transformation. From a man who began his life as a deceiver, he would ultimately become Israel, the man who wrestled with God and was changed. This transformation didn't happen overnight, but was the result of a series of significant experiences and encounters with the divine that shaped his character over the years. Jacob's story is not just about one man. It's about God's redemptive plan for humanity, which begins to take shape through his life and lineage. Throughout his saga, we see how God uses imperfect people to accomplish his perfect plans. This serves as a powerful reminder that, even when we fail, we can still be instruments in God's hands. From birth, the rivalry between Jacob and Esau was evident. In Genesis 25 verses 27 to 34, we see the famous episode where Jacob convinces Esau to sell his birthright for a bowl of lentils. Esau, being a rash man, despised his birthright, which was extremely valuable at that time. The birthright not only guaranteed a larger share of the inheritance, but also the spiritual blessing and leadership of the family. With cunning, Jacob managed to secure this advantage. This episode highlighted the fundamental differences between the two brothers. While Esau lived to satisfy his immediate desires, Jacob thought long-term. He understood the value of the blessing and was willing to do whatever it took to obtain it. However, this created deep resentment between the two, which would later manifest when Jacob stole his father Isaac's blessing. The turning point in their rivalry occurred in Genesis 27, when Jacob, encouraged by his mother Rebekah, deceived his elderly, blind father Isaac. He disguised himself as Esau to receive the blessing that should have been his brother's. This blessing included promises of dominance over nations and prosperity, crucial elements in God's plan for the formation of Israel. When Esau found out, he was furious and vowed to kill Jacob, forcing him to flee to his uncle Laban's house. The rivalry between the two brothers symbolizes something greater: the struggle between earthly and heavenly values. Esau, focused on immediate needs, represents the pursuit of worldly things, while Jacob, despite his faults, represents the pursuit of spiritual blessings, even if he sought them the wrong way at first. This tension between the carnal and the spiritual is present throughout Jacob's life. This rivalry also teaches us about the consequences of our choices. Every decision, good or bad, brings results that shape our future. Jacob chose to deceive, and although he secured the blessing, it set him on a path filled with struggles and challenges that he would have to face in the years to come. Jacob was forced to flee for his life after deceiving Esau and stealing his blessing. He fled to the land of Haran, where his uncle Laban lived. What Jacob didn't know was that in Haran, he would face a series of challenges that would shape his character. In Genesis 28 verses 10 to 22, during his escape, Jacob had a dream at Bethel, where he saw a ladder connecting heaven and earth, with angels ascending and descending. In this dream, God reaffirmed the covenant made with his ancestors, promising him protection and numerous descendants. When Jacob arrived at Laban's house, he fell in love with Rachel, Laban's daughter, and offered to work 7 years to marry her. But Laban, just as Jacob had deceived before, also deceived him. On the wedding night, Laban substituted Rachel with her older sister, Leah. Jacob only realized the switch the next morning, but it was too late. To finally marry Rachel, he had to work another 7 years. Genesis 29 verses 15 to 30. This series of deceptions that Jacob suffered served as a sort of lesson for his past actions. He experienced firsthand what it meant to be deceived, which caused him to reflect on his own life. Even so, God continued to bless him. Over the 20 years he worked for Laban, Jacob prospered. God blessed him with a large family and wealth, despite Laban's constant deceptions. In addition to the challenges with Laban, Jacob also faced difficulties in his family life. Leah and Rachel were in constant competition for his attention, which created tensions in his home. Rachel, whom he loved more, was initially barren, while Leah bore him many sons. This emotional and familial imbalance was a great challenge for Jacob, who found himself caught in domestic disputes while trying to build his life and ensure his household's prosperity. Throughout these years, Jacob had to learn to trust God, even in the midst of deception and difficulties. His character was shaped by these experiences, preparing him for the great encounter he would later have with God. His personal and familial challenges led him to mature and increasingly rely on God for guidance and protection. After 20 years of serving Laban, Jacob decided it was time to return to his homeland. He had grown wealthy and built a large family, but he knew he would have to face Esau again. Fearing the encounter and the possible consequences of his past deception, Jacob began to carefully plan his return journey. In Genesis 32 verses 6 to 8, Jacob learned that Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men, which only heightened his fear. The night before the meeting, Jacob was alone by the Jabbok River. It was in this solitude that he had the most significant encounter of his life. In Genesis 32 verses 24 to 30, Jacob wrestled with a man all night long, but that man was in fact God in physical form. This struggle symbolized the internal battle Jacob had been fighting with himself and God throughout his life. During the struggle, the man touched Jacob's hip, dislocating it and leaving him limping. Even so, Jacob refused to give up and demanded a blessing before the man left. It was at that moment that God changed Jacob's name to Israel, which means one who struggles with God. This was the turning point in Jacob's life. He was no longer the deceiver, but a man transformed by God, ready to lead the nation promised to Abraham and Isaac. This encounter with God completely changed Jacob's life. The physical struggle represented the spiritual transformation happening within him. He left that encounter limping, but with a new identity and purpose. God had granted Jacob the blessing he had sought for so long. But this time, instead of obtaining it through deceit, he received it after honestly wrestling with God and being transformed. This moment marks Jacob's transition into Israel. The man who had spent his life trying to secure blessings through his own abilities now understood that true blessing comes only from God. He was marked by this experience, both physically and spiritually, and this event changed the course of his life and his descendants. If you're enjoying this fascinating journey through Jacob's life and his transformative encounters with God, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Here, we explore rich biblical stories filled with teachings and spiritual lessons that can transform your life. Jacob's life with his wives Leah and Rachel and their servants Bilhah and Zilpah was full of emotional complexities and challenges. Jacob deeply loved Rachel, but he was deceived by Laban and ended up marrying Leah first. This created a rivalry between the sisters, who competed for Jacob's attention and affection. This tension was heightened when Leah began to bear children for Jacob while Rachel was barren. Genesis 29 verses 31 to 35. From Leah came 6 sons: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Desperate for children, Rachel gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob, and through Bilhah, Dan and Naphtali were born. Leah, in turn, gave her servant Zilpah to Jacob, and through Zilpah, Gad and Asher were born. Rachel finally gave birth to Joseph, Jacob's beloved son, and later Benjamin, Jacob's last son. The rivalry between Rachel and Leah was intense. But even amid these conflicts, God continued to bless Jacob with a large family. The relationship between Jacob and Laban was also marked by tension. Jacob worked for 14 years to marry Rachel and Leah, and an additional 6 years managing Laban's flocks. During this time, Laban constantly changed the terms of their agreement, trying to cheat Jacob out of prosperity. But God was with Jacob and blessed him, multiplying his flocks and increasing his wealth despite Laban's deceit. Genesis 31 verses 1 to 12. Jacob's family, though marked by conflict, became the foundation of the 12 tribes of Israel. Each son would play a significant role in the formation of the nation of Israel, and Jacob's family life was a reflection of God's promise being fulfilled amidst human imperfection. Even with internal rivalries, God continued to bless Jacob's descendants, fulfilling the promise made to him at Bethel. Jacob lived a life full of hard work and sacrifice for his family. His dedication to Rachel and his children showed his love and commitment, despite difficult circumstances. Additionally, his constant struggles with Laban and the rivalries within his family were an emotional battleground that shaped Jacob and prepared him for future challenges. Jacob's struggle with God was the turning point of his life. This wasn't just a physical event, but a spiritual struggle that symbolized the deep transformation Jacob was undergoing. Throughout his life, Jacob had always sought God's blessings, but often tried to obtain them through deceit and manipulation. However, by wrestling with God, he finally realized that true blessing could only be obtained through total surrender to God. The struggle took place by the Jabbok River, the night before Jacob's reunion with his brother Esau. Jacob was alone and filled with fear of what might happen. He knew he had deceived Esau and feared for his life. It was in this moment of great anguish that God came to him in physical form, and the two wrestled all night long. The struggle was intense, but Jacob refused to give up. He wanted a blessing and wouldn't let it go. When God touched Jacob's hip and dislocated it, he was left with a limp, but he still clung to God and asked for a blessing. This was the moment when God changed Jacob's name to Israel, marking a new identity and a new destiny. God blessed Jacob and confirmed the promise he had made to Abraham and Isaac, promising him great descendants and prosperity. Jacob left the struggle with a permanent mark. His dislocated hip caused him to limp for the rest of his life. This mark was a physical reminder that he had wrestled with God and prevailed. However, the greater change was internal. Jacob was no longer the same man. He now understood that his life was in God's hands and that his blessings didn't come from his own efforts but from divine grace. This encounter with God was one of the most important moments of Jacob's life. Not only was he blessed, but he was also transformed. The struggle symbolizes our own spiritual battles, where we often resist God's will. But in the end, we are transformed when we fully surrender to Him. After his struggle with God, Jacob prepared to face his brother Esau. He feared that Esau was still angry and seeking revenge. To try to appease the situation, Jacob sent gifts ahead, hoping to win Esau's favor. He divided his family into groups, thinking that if one group was attacked, the other might escape. His fear was great, but he knew he needed to face the brother he had deceived. To Jacob's surprise, when Esau met him, he didn't attack. Instead, Esau ran to meet Jacob, embraced him, and wept. The reunion, described in Genesis 33 verse 4, was a powerful demonstration of the power of forgiveness and reconciliation. Esau had overcome his anger, and the two brothers reconciled after many years of separation and conflict. Jacob, who had expected the worst, was met with grace and forgiveness. This reconciliation showed that even the most broken relationships can be restored by God. The reunion between Jacob and Esau not only brought peace to the family, but also marked the end of a long journey of fleeing and fear for Jacob. Jacob offered Esau many gifts, but Esau initially refused. However, Jacob insisted, saying that seeing Esau's face was like seeing the face of God because he had been received with favor. This comment reflects Jacob's deep transformation. He now saw God's hand in everything, including the reconciliation with his brother. The reconciliation between Jacob and Esau is a powerful reminder that God can restore relationships that have been destroyed by deceit, anger, and betrayal. Even when everything seems lost, God is capable of bringing healing and renewal. This story teaches us about the power of forgiveness and grace, and how God can work in our hearts to lead us to reconciliation. Jacob's story is full of deep spiritual lessons. One of the first lessons we learn is about God's sovereignty. From Jacob's birth, God had already chosen the younger to be the heir of the promise. This reminds us that God's plans are greater than ours, and that He works in our lives in ways we often don't understand. Another important lesson is about personal transformation. Jacob began his life as a deceiver, but throughout his journey, God shaped and transformed him. His struggle with God symbolizes this transformation. Often, we resist God and try to do things our way, but it is in total surrender that we find our true identity and purpose. Additionally, Jacob's life teaches us about perseverance. Jacob didn't give up when he wrestled with God. He held on until he received a blessing. This challenges us not to give up in our own spiritual battles. Even when we are tired or wounded, we must continue seeking God with all our hearts, trusting that He has a blessing for us. The reconciliation with Esau teaches us about the power of forgiveness and restoration. Though Jacob had deceived his brother, God worked in Esau's heart and brought peace between them. This story reminds us that no matter how broken a relationship may be, God can bring healing and renewal. Finally, Jacob's life shows us that God uses imperfect people to accomplish His perfect plans. Jacob had many flaws, but God chose him and transformed him into Israel, the patriarch of a great nation. This gives us hope that, despite our failures, God can redeem us and use us for His purposes. Today, we explored the incredible story of Jacob, the man who wrestled with God and was forever changed. His life was marked by deception, challenges, struggles, and reconciliation, but most of all by a pursuit of God's blessing. We learned that no matter how hard we try to do things our way, true blessing and transformation come when we fully surrender to God. If you enjoyed this story and want to keep learning more about the incredible stories of the Bible, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. May God bless your life, and see you in the next video.